I'm not sure really if this is going to be useful or not. But I thought I'd start to record some of my general thoughts on Shadows of Yog-Sothoth if I decide to run it as a Gaslight or 1890s set scenario. I don't know if I'm going to do that, but if I do, there are certain things that will be of a concern. Obviously, the technology was not vastly different, but it was different enough. I mean, you didn't have flight, etc. But I would assume that transportation, I think the transportation would be an issue, you know, how to get from the various places. I think that this campaign, which again, I have not yet read all the way through, I need to do that, but I know it at least goes to Easter Island at one point, so that's going to take a bit. It goes to Scotland, probably a little easier than, say, Easter Island. It's designed to start in Boston, and I may still keep that, still have it set in Boston to begin. I have thought, and oh yeah, and it goes to the American Southwest at one point. So transportation is going to be an issue. You know, the 1890s, you still had you had boats going various places. You had trains, but not necessarily to everywhere. And getting to South America and then out into the Pacific, it's going to take some time. I don't know if it's appropriate to have the players have multiple characters, say characters all part of an organization and placed in various spots around the world. That could be an option. Depending on how the timing is set in the campaign, if timing is important, then this might be a problem. But if timing is not extremely important between scenarios, then you could simply fast forward time. You know, if the last scenario was in, you know, August of 1893, then, you know, is there a reason why you couldn't have it in March of 95? I don't know. I'm going to have to read through and find that out. But I do think that transportation will be a major issue. Something that I tend to fictionalize to a degree because I want my players, I want to be open to my players playing whatever characters they like. So I do tend to fictionalize somewhat the treatment of the genders and of minorities. So, you know, it's not an issue I necessarily want to focus a game on, and not necessarily one that I feel especially qualified to deal with. So I do tend to have things like, for example, in the last game that I ran, and possibly in this one, depending on how things work, I had the characters all members of a real-life group called the Cosmos Club. Now, the Cosmos Club did, there were members that did try to bring women into the club membership back in, I think, as far back as the teens or the early 20s. And that was shot down by the more conservative members of the club. Eventually, the club was forced by law to open itself up to men and women. They also early on had attempted to introduce members who were not white and were again voted down by the more racist members of the club. So in my fictionalized version of it, that was not the case. They were more open, and so I had players and characters of different genders involved. And so I think that a certain level of fictionalization on that point will no doubt happen. But you know, the 1890s were hardly a time in many places of gender equality or of any kind of equality. So that can be a bit of a challenge. And it's something that I'll look into and see, you know, try to see how to treat it appropriately so that, again, everyone involved in my game feels welcome. but we also maybe deal with some of the realities of what was going on. It depends. It depends on how the campaign goes and how my players feel about that sort of thing. So we'll see on that. But certainly, again, we go back to technology and that sort of thing. And travel was, the further back you go, the more difficult it becomes. So that's something to be concerned about, and something that I'll look into: costs and time and availability of trips from one place to another. I do like to work that sort of thing in, even if I don't necessarily like to work in all historical details. So again, that's up for debate whether or not I'm even going to set it in the 1890s or not. Now, obviously, because of its focus, Cthulhu by Gaslight is a useful source book, but also its focus is on England, and mine typically is not. It will be helpful if we do go to Scotland, as this campaign does have to go. No doubt to have something on, England, UK, and that time period. But the book, on as far as its usefulness for the U.S., might be a little more challenging. We'll see. But there's the internet. It exists. I can look things up. That shouldn't be too much of a problem. I have some books on the United States in the 1890s, and that shouldn't really be a major concern. My concern, I guess, at this point, because of what I want out of this campaign, is will I be able to work this out so that it is not a giant time suck? Is this a campaign that can be run in, we'll say, 6 months of real-time meeting every other week or something to that effect? Can it be run in that amount of time? I've seen people saying that it's taken them almost as long as running Masks of Nyarlathotep. Well, that's not going to do at all. And I have thought about skipping the initial scenario. Again, I'm not sure if I will skip it completely, if I will rewrite it from the ground up, or if I will simply use pieces of it and maybe mix it into something else. I'm not sure. I haven't decided on that. Again, I really need to read further into this campaign to find out for sure what I'm going to do. And frankly, am I actually going to use this campaign? That could be a real change to anything if I decide that this campaign just simply doesn't work for my needs. I don't know. We'll see. My next thought and concern is what edition and what style of game will I use to run Shadows of Yog-Sothoth if I do run it? Am I going to use what I am most used to, classic Call of Cthulhu? This, I believe, is the 6th edition. Honestly, there was never a great deal of difference between editions. I've seen people try to tell me that there was a lot of a difference between editions, and I'm sorry, they're just not correct. I learned to play in, I think, the 3rd edition, and there's organizational changes and a few tweaks here and there, and certainly this is a nicer book. But as far as like actual core mechanics, it's Worlds of Wonder. It's the Chaosium home system. It's basic role playing. It hasn't changed all that drastically. Now, with the 7th edition, that's the biggest change so far that I've seen. And honestly, even that is not a massive change. Sure, you just multiply by 5 like you always did, but now you use statistics and keep them percentiles. Instead of having 12 strength, you have a 60 strength, but it equates out to the same thing. It's just times 5, and you keep everything on the percentile. If anything, that seems more logical and more intuitive. But that said, I don't actually own 7th edition. I haven't purchased it yet. I've been holding off on. I'm trying not to spend a great deal of money now. Obviously, since I have Mask of Nyarlathotep and Horror on the Orient Express, and I also got the new edition of Glorantha role playing or RuneQuest role playing in Glorantha, whatever it's called. I haven't succeeded in not spending a lot of money, but I'm usually not going crazy, and I figured, well, I own this edition of Call of Cthulhu. Heck, I owned 2 other Call of Cthulhu basic books. I've since passed at least one of them on to someone else, hopefully to get some enjoyment out of it. Do I need to upgrade to a new edition? And I'm not sure. I've been thinking about it, and I haven't made that decision yet. But that does then bring up another issue, which is, do I want to go even one step further and use Pulp Cthulhu to run this game? That is also tempting. And that brings up sort of a strange thing for me with Call of Cthulhu and with Pulp. And it's I guess probably there's a debate. I'm sure there's always a debate of this sort of thing. But is Pulp Cthulhu good Cthulhu? And I don't know. I would say no, it's not. But that doesn't mean it's not good fun. I think probably if I wanted to really capture the essence of Lovecraft, period, but of other cosmic horror writers, if I really wanted to capture that essential nature in an RPG, I don't know that Call of Cthulhu is the best option for that. But certainly Call of Cthulhu, as written, as created in many of its published adventures, I don't think it is. I think that the Shadows of Yog-Sothoth, from what I've seen, certainly Mask of Nyarlathotep, and I think Horror on the Orient Express, while all fine product, I don't necessarily think that they capture cosmic horror necessarily well. They get into a little bit, excuse me, they get a little bit into more, and this is going to sound more negative than I intended to, but more of a D&D style thing. It is monster hunting. It is, battling against the forces of evil. And I don't know that that's necessarily the right tack for doing some kind of Lovecraft RPG. Maybe the best way to do that is a one-on-one game. Again, getting into the personal horror of realizing that nothing about the universe is personal. But that's neither here nor there. If I were to run something like this, I think that a pulpier game is appropriate, because this is a pulpier style of scenario. It's world hopping. It's it's fighting monsters. I haven't read this all the way through, but I think that maybe captures a little bit more of the essence of that. And I think that certainly taking the story Call of Cthulhu, which does have elements of world hopping, but not really. It's one guy piecing together all of these disparate facts from all over the world. It's not really him hopping on a boat, taking his shotgun and pistol and sailing across the world to shoot deep ones in the face. It's none of that. Which is kind of maybe how some of the scenarios in Call of Cthulhu go a little more along those lines. And that's not a bad thing. That's an entertaining way to play. So, and that's probably what I'm going for. If I do this, I'm probably leaning into the pulpier side of things. I probably do want it to be a little more Indiana Jones than Randolph Carter. I don't know. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. Maybe I'm full of crap. Who knows? I'm sure somebody will tell me I am. So I think that, again, if I were to run this game, I would be trying to go a little pulpier. So maybe it would be appropriate to upgrade to 6th edition and pick up Pulp Cthulhu and run it through there, where you have your characters who are a little more two-fisted with their special abilities and things like that, and less likelihood of getting killed horribly quickly. So that's a thought, and I have not made that decision. I don't need to make it right now, so we'll see. Um, so yeah, so that's where I'm at. I guess is am I going to convert this back to an 1890s campaign? What changes will I have to make? What information will I need to gather? Um, will the characters still be members of the Cosmos Club? I have thought about using that. I believe it was, I have to go back, I have a history of the Cosmos Club, and I cannot for the life of me remember when they actually started, but it would have been around this time. And it might make sense if I were to do more with the first scenario instead of having the Silver Twilight, which is basically just a play on the Golden Dawn. Maybe I have the Golden Dawn and actually work them into it. I don't know. I don't know if I'll do that or not. So really, I'm just kind of spitballing here, bouncing things off the wall and seeing what happens. Yeah, so we'll see. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to keep thinking about it, and we'll see where it goes. And if I do start working on this in earnest, maybe I'll record some more of my thoughts on how I go along with it. Look at, what will I go through in converting this to the 1890s, and maybe fleshing out, maybe cutting down a few different sections. I'm not sure. I'll have to see how I feel about all of these scenarios, and do they mesh. One thing that sometimes does bother me a little with some of the published scenarios is how kind of all over the place they are. And I mean that not geographically, but I mean thematically, and they get to. I remember Kurt Weigel on Game Geeks referring to things as a mythos hoedown. And when I read through some of these published scenarios, that's what I keep thinking of. And that's where I kind of go back to that D&D thought of one of the things that, as a young person reading through some old D&D adventures when I was first getting into this back in the 80s, I would read through and be like, why are there goblins in this room and an ogre in the next room and a gelatinous cube in the next room and a dragon in the next room? Why on earth are all these things, all these different things that are unrelated, all hanging out in the same building and the same general structure, one or two rooms apart from each other? This is dumb. And that was how I felt as a young person looking into that. And while I won't say that necessarily these scenarios are on that level, and perhaps the D&D ones, perhaps I'm being unfair to them, that's just my memory of reading through them and not caring for them. But in a campaign, if I were to run this and it were to go for 6 months, I don't know. Again, I don't know the content on this for sure, but do I want to run a campaign for 6 months where the players run up against, deep ones and ghouls and 2 or 3 different elder gods and the great race of Yith and all these things? Do I want to run a campaign where they keep facing off against a different mythos creature a week? No, I don't. I always kind of thought that was silly. When I've written my own games, whenever I've run Call of Cthulhu, I've typically written my own, and a lot of times I tend to focus on cultists. That's my primary antagonist, is usually the cult. Typically a single cult. And then if I am going to work in mythos creatures, I tend to have them in service of a theme. So for a long time, I ran, not for a long time, but I did run a long time ago, an ongoing series of adventures that involved Shub-Niggurath and a sort of an avatar of that particular thing. And the scenarios all revolved around cultists who worshipped her, the avatar, and these minions of of hers. And those three things were the physical antagonists throughout several different scenarios as we played through. Um, I, I didn't want to muddy the waters by then bringing in deep ones, which even though geographically this was all set in Maine, geographically would have made perfect sense for deep ones to show up. I didn't want to bring in those because it would change the tone. I don't know. I think that a focus is more important. So I'm going to look into this campaign and see how focused it is. If it isn't, maybe again, if the bones are there for a scenario or a campaign that is going to work for me, if the bones are there, I can redress the rest of it. I can take the bones and build up a new body. We'll see. So anyhow, if you have thoughts on it, if you've run Shadows of Yog-Sothoth and have thoughts about the themes or about how it plays out or the timing, how long it took you to run it, I would love to hear about that in the comments. And your thoughts on running published Call of Cthulhu scenarios versus writing your own, and how you handle cosmic horror versus pulp. I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that. So thanks. I'll talk to you all soon.